This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
I said before the last election, hold the PCC elections on the same day as the county elections. I've still believed the same. We should hold elections on the same day as many as possible to reduce the cost for everyone, and that will generate more turnout. You know, if turnout was the precluding factor for elections, we wouldn't necessarily have council by-elections or council elections themselves. What we need to do is make it as easy as possible for people to take part, and I think part of that is doing all of the elections on the same day.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast in a week where the Doge arrived in Kent to audit KCC's books, much to the consternation of Medway's Vince Maple. A licensing committee was asked to strip a popular takeaway of its licence over serious immigration offences going back a decade, and more concerns were raised about proposals for a giant new housing development in the county. I'm Dan Essen, the local democracy reporter covering Kent's district and borough councils. Regular host Simon Finlay is away this week, so I'm in the hot seat, joined by Robert Boddy, who reports on Medway Council. Hello. And as always, senior news editor Nikki White, who's been looking at what's been going on at Westminster.
Hello.
This week's special guest is Kent's Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Scott, who responds to a special Kent Online report which showed just how much his election cost the taxpayer for a role few people actually know about. Rob, what have you been looking at Medway Council this week?
This week there was crossover with Simon's usual brief as Medway Council leader Vince Maple took aim at KCC, or more specifically the Reform UK administration's move to call in a so-called Department of Government Efficiency or Doge team a la Elon Musk. At a cabinet meeting this week, the Labour leader of the town's authority called the letter sent by Reform UK disgraceful and accused it of threatening staff.
And what did Reform's letter actually say?
So this was a letter from KCC leader Lyndon Kemcaran, party leader Nigel Farage and party chairman Zia Youssef. It said Kent would be seeing a Doge team coming to look through the books at County Hall, a team including, quote, world-class software engineers, data analysts and forensic auditors. The threatening accusation is probably in relation to a comment made in the letter saying if there was resistance to the Doge team, the council would pass a motion to consider any obstruction a matter of gross misconduct. And now Councillor Maple said it was a disgrace the letter had been sent, that two of the signatories, Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef, had nothing to do with KCC, and that KCC staff had his sympathies for the way they had been treated.
So what did Reform have to say about the comment?
In Medway, Reform UK's group leader, Councillor David Finch, said the Labour leader's comments reflected the exact problem that Doge was intending to fix. He said, a quote, a resistance to scrutiny, accountability and sensible reform, and it was, quote, a knee-jerk political outrage. He also said it was inappropriate for a Medway leader to criticise work done at KCC, particularly, he said, when it intends to improve outcomes for residents. If anything, he said, Medway should be looking at bringing its own Doge team.
Thanks very much, Robert.
What have you been working on this week, Dan?
So I've been yet again looking at licensing and watching yet another business get busted for hiring illegal workers on little to no pay.
Whereabouts is this place and what did they do?
Takeaway in question is Badger Indian Cuisine in Tenterden, and basically last week it came to our attention that the Home Office asked Ashford Borough Council to strip them of their licence for immigration offences going back 10 years. In a massive report into the business, the Home Office detailed 4 separate enforcement visits going back to 2015, where each time they found multiple illegal workers. They were all from Bangladesh. Some had come on student or working holiday visas, overstayed and then claimed asylum. Others got into the country in other ways, but none of them had the right to work legally. Officials even found asylum registration cards which clearly said the people had no right to work. Some of the workers admitted they weren't even paid or paid very infrequently, and sometimes given food and accommodation in lieu of pay. And at the most recent visit in January this year, immigration enforcement even say that one member of staff greeted them, told them he was going to go get his boss, and then disappeared. And they think he fled via a ladder which they found next to an open window upstairs. And if all that wasn't enough, the business has been hit with a total of 120 grand of fines for immigration offences since 2015 and hasn't paid a penny of them.
So what did Ashford Council's licensing panel think of all this?
They were displeased, to say the least. The firm's owners didn't even bother to turn up or send a representative to the committee. Councillor Kate Walder, who was chairing the committee, even described the workers as slaves, given their very low pay. The committee did decide to strip the venue of its licence, which means they can't sell alcohol anymore or serve anything after 11 p.m. But the business will still operate. Banning people from running businesses full stop is a completely separate legal matter. The immigration officer at the meeting said that this sort of labour practice is a key driver of illegal immigration. So I think many would think this looks like quite a light punishment for such severe offending, but one would hope this isn't the end of it and the Home Office stay on their case in future.
So, Nikki, what have you been working on this week?
So development is always a hot topic, and with many councils struggling to meet their housing targets, it's a tough call for those who have to decide between protecting our green space and providing us with homes. One huge project that we've touched on before, which popped up again this week, is a proposal to build 5,000 homes on land near Lenham. And now, as well as the homes, the Heathlands Garden Village, it's been called, it will also include a new district centre, a primary school, a secondary school, a country park, a healthcare centre and a new railway station. Maidstone Council and Homes England are behind the scheme, and a few weeks ago some drop-in sessions were held for people to go along and find out more about it.
So this development plan's been floating around for a little while. What's new this time?
So one of those who dropped into the sessions was Faversham and Mid-Kent MP Helen Whately, who, after taking some time to digest the information, has published a letter this week that she sent to Maidstone Council's Chief Exec Alison Broom about some of the concerns that she had about it. Now, she says that when she went along, she wasn't reassured by what she heard from representatives from the Council and Homes England.
I'd imagine with a scheme of that size, there's quite a lot to think about, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, Helen's been against the Heathlands project from the beginning, but now it's been included in the authority's local plan. It's a case of just trying to ensure what does get built is the best possible solution for everyone, not just talking about those who already live in the nearby village of Lenham, but also those who are moving into the Heathlands estate. Now, Helen is worried that even if things end up in the plan, there's nothing to stop the developers further down the line saying, oh, we can't afford that bit, so can't do that. And we're going to end up with hundreds of new residents isolated in the countryside, relying on roads which are already busy, and also struggling to sign up with GPs and dentists, which is a topic that we come back to again and again. Now, in her letter, Helen reiterates that she doesn't believe the transport infrastructure can support a development of this size, and what she wants to see is a planned timeline starting from phase 1, showing when all the supporting infrastructure is going to be built to help those that are living there. Now, she raises the point that even if this proposed railway station is built, there's no guarantee that Southeasterns are actually going to stop their trains there, or what they could do is skip other stations, so stop at the new one at Heathlands but then not stop out anywhere else, and that's obviously going to impact people who are beyond Lenham. Now, while she says that she welcomes the affordable housing that is earmarked in the scheme, she thinks it would be better if they were built in a town centre where there's already supporting services available, and she also thinks that some of the homes should be built with older and disabled people in mind, and so that would in turn free up some family homes across the borough, and that's going to help meet some of the social housing needs that we've got problems with at the moment. Another thing that she wants to see is there are fields that are currently proposed as a buffer between Lenham and Heathlands, and she wants to make sure that they remain, ensuring both villages keep their own identities and don't over time merge into one huge town. So the letter has just gone to Maidstone Council to address her concerns as part of the consultation.
Thanks very much, Nikki.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Our guest today has been Kent's Police and Crime Commissioner for nearly 10 years now. He's only the second ever holder of that post, but as collateral damage at a local government reorganisation, he's now quite likely to be the last. Matthew Scott, Kent Police and Crime Commissioner, joins us now. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much for coming. So we did a special investigation at Kent Online this week into the most recent election to your office, which was held last year. My colleague Simon and Ollie found that given the very low turnout of only 20% of voters, it ended up costing an average of £11.62 per vote cast in the election. Do you think the people of Kent get their value for money out of the office for PCC? What do we get in exchange for that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you only have to look at the millions of pounds of extra revenue I've generated for Kent Police over the years, whether that's funding for hotspot policing, for our violence reduction unit, for victims of crime to tackle antisocial behaviour. In addition, I've also generated millions of pounds worth of savings over the last 9 years as well. So we deliver exceptional value for money. We've even taken that approach nationally. I set up a company with colleagues 5 years ago to make procurement savings, which have generated over £300 million worth of savings for policing. So I appreciate that people will look at that costs and ask questions. We've generated value for money, but I've always said we should always hold elections on the same day whenever possible.
No, I see what you mean. One thing I want to ask is If the position of PCC was abolished at the stroke of midnight tonight, who would notice? What would be the first thing that happened?
Well, you'd reduce accountability of the police. Your victim services would possibly cease to function because there'd have to be new services provided. You would have a reduction in antisocial behaviour contracts and things like that. There's some very tangible things that we as police and crime commissioners do, which we promote. It's not as simple as just abolishing it at the stroke of midnight. You'd have to replace it with something else. And the system that we had before of police authorities was more expensive. It didn't meet as often. It met 4 or 5 times a year, and therefore it wasn't as flexible or as agile when things were happening. So people would notice a difference, and I actually think it would make accountability, governance and support for victims in this county worse.
I actually wanted to ask you about how police authorities functioned before the creation of PCCs. So they were, panels consisting of 2/3 of elected councillors and 1/3 of magistrates. I know you say they met less frequently, but there are more elected officials on that. There are also legally trained people and former magistrates on that. In what ways is the institution of Police and Crime Commissioner democratically or operationally superior for policing and public accountability than having a panel comprised of councillors and magistrates?
Well, just to remember as well that the councillors were politically appointed. They weren't necessarily always put there on merit, and it was a more expensive way of doing things. By funneling through one person and one office, you've got someone who is here every single day, not just 5 times or 5 meetings a year. We are acting as a voice to government to lobby for improvements to generate more funding. Police authorities didn't do that. I've recruited, with the support of the previous government, over 1,000 more police officers in the last 9 years. A police authority wouldn't have done that. That money would have been swallowed up for other things. So police authorities are not the solution to the conundrum of what we do in its place. We do need these directly elected people who are going in every single day with the ambition of making things better for victims and witnesses. Police authorities, yes, laudable that they were doing things to scrutinise the work of the police, but actually didn't have anywhere near the same level of responsibility as we do as police and crime commissioners.
There's a lot of public discussion at the moment about general distrust or loss of faith in the institution of policing. Lots and lots of crimes go unsolved. The courts are overwhelmed. Many people get sentences which are considered to be ludicrously low for what they do. In terms of the nuts and bolts of policing and what people expect from it, they want local criminals locked out, they want effective policing. What does a PCC do to guarantee that rather, as opposed to just sort of regulation and paperwork?
Well, so we've actually been involved in my office in helping improve that. So with the 1,000 extra officers, we've put over 250 of those directly into neighbourhood beats. We are working with the criminal justice system to improve the processes so more people get justice. As a result of the recruitment that we've been able to do, charges are up, solve rates are up, more burglars are being sent to prison, and burglary rates are coming down. The number of county lines are coming down. So we can actually impact operational policing at a distance, but also hold our chief constables to account to make sure the police are doing what it is the public want them to do. That's set out in my police and crime plan. And I'm pleased to say that, last year it was a small rise, but it was a rise nonetheless in a time when the police are coming in for significant levels of criticism that trust in Kent Police rose last year. We've still got a long way to go in order to support victims and improve their satisfaction with the service that they receive. But these are the things that police and crime commissioners can actually do in partnership with chief constables to make our neighbourhoods safer.
So you said earlier you think the election for PCC should be held on the same day as local elections, and I quite agree with you. You said in response to our article that democracy and accountability is worth any price, so that the cost of the election is maybe neither here nor there. But why then is it that so few people vote in PCC elections? Surely if the role was recognised as important among the general public, surely it would get at least as many people as vote in local elections, but it doesn't. The turnout was 1 in 5 eligible voters.
Yeah, and I understand that, and we do a lot of work to engage with the public to help them understand the role, to make sure that they know when elections are taking place. But at the same time, unlike the Mayor of London, I don't spend millions of pounds on my own self-promotion. So we do what we can to promote the role of the office and what we are delivering. But the election would have cost the same if more people had voted. So I think the solution really is I said before the last election, hold the PCC elections on the same day as the county elections. I've still believed the same. We should hold elections on the same day, as many as possible, to reduce the cost for everyone. And that will generate more turnout. If turnout was the precluding factor for elections, we wouldn't necessarily have council by-elections or council elections themselves. What we need to do is make it as easy as possible for people to take part. And I think part of that is doing all of the elections on the same day.
So one of the things I mentioned earlier is that the Office of the Kent Police and Crime Commissioner is very likely to be abolished in the ongoing local government reorganisation because the Kent Police Authority area lines up pretty much exactly with the new strategic mayoral authority. What are your thoughts on that? And since your job is one way or another probably for the chop, what should replace it?
Well, that's the thing. We don't really know what's going to happen in Kent now because the government said one thing about devolution, and instead of devolution, we've got top-down reorganisation instead. If the government wants to introduce mayors with PCC's powers, then they need to get on and do it. That's not an issue for me. If they want to roll the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner into a new mayoralty, then so be it. But actually, I would argue the police and crime commissioners with that direct control and work and responsibility for policing is having an effect. It is working really, really well. The thing is with this government, they announce things and then they U-turn. So we just don't know what it is they're going to do. All I'm focused on over the next 3 years is the next 3 years of my term until 2028, cutting crime, supporting victims, building trust.
One of the last things I wanted to ask, so you are, despite being Police and Crime Commissioner, you are obviously a Conservative Party politician and a former councillor. I guess when you went into politics, you probably didn't see your career starting and ending as the Police and Crime Commissioner of a non-metropolitan county. So when your job does end up going, might we expect to see you in the standing for one of the new unitary authorities or maybe even for Mayor of Kent?
If it happens, I would be interested. Of course I would. There's a lot that we could do with a properly established mayoral office. I think there's a great misunderstanding, though, about what the powers the mayors will have because it's a combined authority with councillors represented on it as well. And it's not straightforward executive power like there is in London. So we have to see what those powers are going to look like. But of course, why would I not be interested?
Matthew Scott, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Once upon a time, the word Doge referred to an Italian head of state. In the 2010s, it referred to a particular dog beloved of internet memes. But thanks to Elon Musk, it now refers to the Department of Government Efficiency. Kent County Council's new reform leadership has brought their very own Doge in, looking to cut costs at the council, which has drawn considerable attention this week. Rob, what are the politics of it and why their neighbours in Medway care so much what KCC do?
Well, I think the reason, so as I mentioned in my main bit, Vince Maple has decided to sort of speak about this is Labour now really believe that Reform are their main party of competition whenever the next election may come. So at every level, I think we're going to see attempts to sort of undermine, attack the Reform Party. So while I think Vince Maple, as a former trade union organiser, is definitely interested in staff members and workers' rights and all these sorts of things, his exact, whether KCC staff is at the forefront of his mind, I'm not totally certain of that. But it does pay for him to attack the Reform Party and try to make them seem, out of touch or doing the wrong sorts of things.
So obviously his criticism is probably in large part political. Do you think he would be as bothered if, when Labour authorities bring in consultants from externally who also don't have any direct mandate, much like this Doge team doesn't?
Well, he did say in the comments that he made at the meeting that it wouldn't matter which political party was making these changes. He thinks this is inappropriate, and particularly some of the language that was used in the letter sent by Reform. He said if your neighbour was doing something bad, you'd call out your neighbour. Whether that's necessarily true is another thing.
So Vince, obviously, he described the wording of the letter as threatening, with Reform saying that if civil servants of the council obstruct this, then their motions will be passed declaring that to be gross misconduct. Do you think that's a fair description? Is it intended as a threat to council staff?
I think, like with the larger policy itself, I think this is quite a bit of show rather than substance. I think Reform wants to be seen as doing things that other parties won't do. So they're being very loud and brash and saying we're going to cut all these things and we're going to, if we need to kick people out and sack people for getting in the way, then that's what we'll do. Whether that threat actually has any follow through, I don't really know. I spoke with the Reform leader at Medway Council and he said it's been misconstrued as a threat. It's really not. And the letter itself did say we don't think this is going to be necessary because people will do what we want. What do you think about this? I mean, do you think it's legitimate for Reform to bring in this group?
I don't think it'll be successful because if you take everyone who's talked about it with experience of it at face value, there's very little efficiencies left to find in KCC, or so they say, though I'm sure there's probably a degree of inefficiency and waste as there is in any large organisation. But in terms of whether it's legitimate, Reform got on a low turnout, admittedly, but as far as it goes, they officially got a huge mandate from the public of Kent. They very openly said all throughout the campaign, everywhere in the country, that their first priority would be bringing in this sort of copycat of Doge intended to bring efficiencies and bring what they consider to be basically private sector expertise and dynamism to the stultified and risk-averse culture of the public sector. Whether that will actually work, I don't think so. It sounds to me like kind of cargo cult Thatcherism. This is exactly, that's the exact same rationale that's been used for bringing in private sector consultants and hollowing out the public sector for years. But it is what they're elected to do, and they have a mandate to do it. And it's not necessarily illegitimate for elected politicians to come in and say, this is what we were elected to do. Unelected civil servants do what we tell them to, and if they oppose it, they'll face consequences. That's how a democratic state should operate. But the question, I don't think it will actually work. But also in a curious way, it can look in that way like it's a reassertion of the primacy of elected authority, of the control of councillors rather than civil servants. But I think, as you pointed out earlier, Rob, in many ways it's still a diminution of that authority. They still, rather than the new reform county councillors taking responsibility for it themselves and saying we will hold the civil servants to account, they have this external party organisation which will do it for them. Nikki, in terms of their bid to find efficiencies and save loads of cash at KCC, do you think it'll actually work? What kind of effect do you think it'll have on the staff at the county council?
I don't think it's going to be very motivational for the staff. I don't necessarily disagree with what Reform are doing. I mean, nobody's going to say that we shouldn't find ways of trying to find savings and make sure that things are more efficient while improving services. I mean, we all want that. But to come in at the start of a process and say straight away, you're going to cut wasteful spending, that just implies that everyone beforehand has never thought of making savings before, and to threaten people with gross misconduct if they don't go along. I mean, with the spending, it just makes it feel as if people have been spending willy-nilly and not making any thought about it whatsoever. And there's only so much money that's going to come into an authority, and that may be billions, but there's lots of things and costly things which that money has got to be spent on, such as our schools, our adult social care, our potholes in the roads, and that money gets spent very quickly. To come in and say straight away that the spending has been wasteful, I mean, you're going to struggle to get that team on board and work alongside you to deliver those savings once you've got a plan in place. And once you've put people's backs up, it's hard to get that relationship back on track. Now, many of these people at KCC have been doing the job for a long time and are mostly good at it. So there's nothing wrong with a fresh pair of eyes, and Reform will find something, I'm sure. But how you go about it, that's just as important. I mean, we had the Kent Unison rep, Sarah Barwick, saying earlier in the week that people are going to hear the word cuts and they're automatically worrying about whether they're going to have a job in a few months' time. And don't forget, these are people who are already worried about the future because they've got local government reorganisation hanging over their heads. This is going to be a really stressful time for them. I mean, I think Vince Maple was right when he said that people should be treated with respect and not just sent letters that are using threatening language like Reform did.
I think you're definitely right that it will probably cause quite some concern among staff, like union representatives are saying. But lastly, Rob, you mentioned earlier that you think this kind of politicised antagonism towards the public sector is something of a trend these days. Do you think that's really the case?
Yeah, I think it's an easy sort of boogeyman to attack. If you're a politician and you can't get something done because it takes a bit of hard work and a bit of hard graft, it's easier to say, oh, well, the civil servants wouldn't let me do it, rather than say, well, actually, I just couldn't be bothered to put the time in. There are loads of instances which I see where I think if somebody dedicated their time to getting this done, it could get done. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick, and it may not even be massively appreciated when it is done. But if you want it done, then you've got to do it. And I think that is the main reason why the blob, as it is termed a lot, becomes this sort of punching bag rather than sort of facing up to the fact that, there are some difficult things that politicians could do instead.
Okay, folks, that's your lot for this week. Next week, we'll be talking to former Medway councillor and leading business expert Stuart Tranter about his thoughts on how local government can and should be run better. Thanks very much to Rob and Nikki, as ever, for your contributions. And don't forget to keep an eye on Kent Online for the latest politics coverage. You can also sign up to our politics briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. And don't forget to watch KMTV's politics show every Friday at 5 p.m. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.